I wish to thank Cheryl for that presentation. She really told some of the nuts and bolts about cover cropping and some of the biological activities that's going in there. She's very brave to be putting radish for the spring crop. I also heard her say she was planting red clover, and I think that could be problematic as well for harvesting, and it's going to grow pretty tall. But I'm glad she's going for it. What you have in front of you here is my blog. I keep that up fairly regularly, telling what we're doing on the place, what we have of our cover cropping, and just other things that I find of interest. So if you have any interest in looking at that, then you can Google Farming the Palouse, or the URL is on the bottom. So go for that. My two sons, Kye and Devin, now represent the fourth generation of our 113-year-old family farms. My grandfather immigrated from Denmark in the age of 19 and homesteaded south of E1 on Cherry Creek. In 1907, he sold the homestead to his brother and moved to our current acreage, where my wife and I reside today in the house he built in 1911. This pic shows a particularly bad year for the region, 1979. Unfortunately, this is one of our winter wheat fields. I would like to say that we don't see this kind of devastation anymore, but in January of 2019, east of Moscow, I saw a field looking very similar. It still happens and will continue to happen as long as tillage exists on these hills. In 2010, when we developed our ULD, ultra-low disturbance no-till system, we finally accomplished my original goal of stopping the destruction of our soil resource. Two things remain on my bucket list that relate to surface water. One is to stop or minimize water loss from frozen ground, as is shown in this picture. Although this is no longer an overriding erosion concern, the potential is still there, and that runoff water carries nutrients and chemical contamination into public water. The lost water also represents lost yield potential. The second surface water concern is to become better prepared to receive a heavy rainfall event. And I didn't get in on this last year, but Cheryl mentioned that the Pullman area did have something that was probably devastating. I'm sure that sometime we're going to have the same thing in my area. When I listen to the news about flooding around the U.S., I wonder when it's going to be our turn to endure such an event. Our ULD system allows us to maintain armor on the surface, leaves old root and worm channels intact, and modifies soil temperatures. Summer soils highs are 20% cooler, or 20 degrees cooler, compared with a bare soil. And our winter temperatures are 3 to 5 degrees warmer than our bare soil. This is a better growing environment and reduces moisture loss from evaporation. Managing moisture is critical for the future. Losing moisture either through runoff, evaporation, or inefficient plant use will negatively affect the financial sustainability as we progress through the 21st century. I am confident that our ULD system has stopped the deterioration of our soil resource, but we are not improving the capacity of our soil to sustain crops with reduced inputs. No-till has its limits. It's not a cure-all. It is, however, the foundation for us to start building soil health. No-till increases moisture infiltration rate many times greater than a cultivated field. And I am currently measuring 3 times higher rates of moisture infiltration on our green fallow ground compared to our chemical fallow ground. Our infiltration rate has reached the point where we are going to have to change how we apply nutrients to the crop. Climate challenges are everywhere in the news. I won't comment on the subject other than to say that farm input costs are going to rise significantly as public attempts to reverse greenhouse gases. At the same time, USDA predicts farm gate prices as flat out for the next decade, so we probably can't expect relief from a higher commodity price. How are we to survive this challenge? I see only one way, and that is to cut costs and cut them drastically. How can this be done without seriously affecting our financial health and experiencing reduced yields? Two ways show promise in the near future. One is to change our viewpoint about nitrogen and timing of application. An article in the latest Farm Futures magazine by an Ohio State University soil scientist, Ratan Lal, stated that only 30% of applied nitrogen is used by the plant. The remainder goes into the atmosphere as nitrous oxide, leaches into the groundwater, or runs into our streams. Pencil out the potential savings from increasing nitrogen efficiency. It's likely to be significant. Capital Press reported EPA findings for 2018, stating that agriculture contributed 9.3% of the U.S.'s contribution to greenhouse gases. Much of that is being nitrous oxide from fields. We need to manage nitrogen for a more efficient use. The second potential saving may come from water source use for chemistry applied to our crops. A bicarbonate reading of 150 parts per million reduces the effectiveness of the chemistry by 70%. We have known for years that water quality is important for effective use of chemistry. We add conditioners, adjuvants, and wetting agents to a variety of applied chemistry to combat poor water quality. A lot of money may be saved by using higher quality water for our spray solutions. From here on, my comments are likely to take years to see the benefits. I have been enamored with the idea of improving soil health since I first heard Dr. Lehnskov speak on the subject back in 2014. So much so that I have taken 2 of her classes, Life in the Soil and Microscopy. Those classes have given me a basic understanding of the soil microbes and what many of them look like, some of the processes they do, and some of what to look out for. What really caught my attention was a statement that our soils could become self-sustaining in as little as 1 year. That was totally outrageous statement when compared to the information I grew up with to believe. I've concluded that 1 year is not practical for being in the Northwest, although it may be practical within a decade. It won't be easy. The soil health gurus that have my attention all state they find mismanagement of nitrogen and soil compaction as the 2 leading problems hindering crop growth and improved soil health. Nitrogen affects the plant's access to other elements and washes a lot of the plant wastes a lot of the plant energy when in excess amounts in the wrong stage of plant growth. Compaction limits rooting depth, producing anaerobic conditions that lead to an increase in disease and insect issues and reduces access to the nutrients. We will have to identify compacted areas and remove them. When a crop shows stress from suspected compaction, John Kemp, an agronomist and founder of AEA, Advanced Eco Agriculture, recommends a cheap, simple process to make the determination. Dig a hole 20 to 30 inches deep and draw the blade of a pocket knife up through the sidewall. You will be able to determine the depth, the thickness, and the number of compaction layers in that location through the resistance you meet. What have we done, and what are we doing to get ourselves down the road towards a better health, better soil health? This is our operation here, seeding cover crop a couple of years ago, and this is late October. My neighbor's crop is up pretty well, but he's already got erosion on that. That field has no erosion. We had a a flush that spring, coming spring, and our hills had no water movement on it. I credit that to the radish that was in that mix. It does leave holes for frozen ground, and so the water tends to go into it. Other than what I've mentioned, I've seen, I have 7 other comments or commentaries. We have established an area of approximately 70 acres where most of our experimentation is taking place. We have taken biological tests. They show that we have basic biological communities left in our soil, but they're starving. They need food, and that food comes primarily from root exudates. The biological communities vary and need a variety of foods, which means we need a lot of plant diversity to provide a variety of root exudates. Testing crop performance. Over my career, I have spent a lot of money on soil and tissue tests and found the information limited in value. As we change practices to improve soil health, so will our suppliers change products to support our practices. We will be entering into a new era of products that react differently from past products, and we'll have to determine preferred time of application and quantity used. The past 2 years, I have been part of a biological farming group that has been studying this subject. Quite a number of them are in this room today. We have been looking at alternative plant nutritional products and looking at methods for measuring plant response. It would take hours to explain, so my remarks will only brush the surface. The Denali labs in California test all the common mineral elements for their availability in plants. The Denali labs also provide a soil respiration test that gives some indication of the biological activity of the sample. The Apical lab, which is pictured here, in Oregon, compares old and new plant tissue for nutritional movement throughout the plant. For this to be useful, tissue samples will have to be taken periodically throughout the growing season at critical growth stages. With this information, nutrients can be foliar fed to the crop in the attempt to maximize yield. I have changed my sampling concept. In the past, we have created zones within the field that represented 3 different production levels, high, medium, and low. Within each of these zones, we would take a sample from a number of locations, mixing them together, creating a single sample representing that production zone for which a recommendation would be made. My current concept calls for sampling one single spot, both for soil and tissue, and do it year after year, building a database for that one finite location. Then taking all of the information from field scouting, using soil and yield maps, along with the soil and tissue data from that finite location, make the nutrient recommendation for either the zone or the field. It's a little difficult to see here, but this is part of the 70-acre field that I play with. And there's a border right in the upper portion that is the chem fallow portion against the cover crop area. In our experimentation, we have seeded parcels from 5 to 9 species cover crops on a ground intended for fallow, calling that green fallow. One parcel was allowed to grow to maturity and seeded to winter wheat. That year, the yield was lower, but okay for a first try. The next year, the cover crop was intended to be destroyed in June by 3 methods: Roundup, paraquat, and mowing. The mowing was a waste of time. Everything continued to grow. With multi-species mixes, timing to terminate is complex, and the mowing is expensive. The Roundup was too slow. It took 5 days to show any effect and nearly 14 days for most of the plants to desiccate. It looked pretty ratty, neither dead or alive, the remainder of the growing season. I like paraquat takeout method. We used 1 quart and 20-gallon solution. The crop dried in a few days and held quite well until we seeded the wheat in September. In this particular seeding, which is shown here, the green fallow bordered the chem fallow. It was seeded with the same winter wheat cultivar with the same fertility that included N inhibitor and N inhibitor. The chem fallow wheat came up in late September, while the green fallow wheat came up late in November due to a dry fall with late rain. And that's a problem we're having all around here, trying to get the cover crops don't seem to reuse really any more of the moisture in the profile, but the top critical inches is what we lose. So we've got to learn to manage the cover so that we can get our crop up, and that is yet to be done. I noticed that the crop struggled all season. There was a short period where I appeared the green fallow wheat would catch up with the chem fallow wheat, but that didn't materialize. And that's the period you're looking at here. We took a 30 bushel yield hit on the green fallow. The N inhibitor was ineffective, and the nitrogen leached in the front of the root zone, of the root growth. It's obviously that we have to fertilize differently when dealing with cover crops due to its potentially high infiltration rate. This past spring, we used regenerated spring canola as a cover crop. Our 2018 spring canola lived through the winter, so we decided to see if it would benefit there would be a benefit from leaving the live root in the soil for an additional 10 months. This turned problematic. Once canola started bolting, it didn't die. Later that spring, I will try to determine if later this spring, I will try to determine if there's any value to that green root concept and compare it with our regular canola fallow ground. This is a picture of our permacover that we've seeded. This past spring, we have planted 12 acres of permanent cover crop consisting of low-growing perennial cultivars made up of Delmar small burnet, subterranean clover, strawberry clover, white Dutch clover, bird's foot trefoil, Lewis blue flax, and Yakima western yarrow. I wanted to get 8 because Christine Jones suggests 8 as a kind of the critical number, but we couldn't find the 8th one that I could afford. The eighth cultivar was going to cost me more than the rest of the planting, so we stuck with 7. I had some volunteer canola in that. We used that for the 8th. The stand had a few holes that filled with dog fennel late in the season. The cover was mowed twice. This last November, we seeded winter wheat into this perma cover. In the coming weeks, we will determine what, if any, chemistry is needed to keep it in a harvestable crop, as well as determine what fertility is needed. At this point, there has been no fertilizer chemistry applied. Currently, the winter wheat is in the 2-leaf stage and growing. Our yield expectations are low. Due to the late emergence of the crop, we will test regularly for fertility and nutrient movement in this crop. This year, we will be part of the Nester project, as I'm going to call it. You've seen that with Mike and DeWalt here earlier today, where we will see the 2021 winter wheat crop in mid-June, along with a specifically designed cover crop mix of C4 plants and possibly 1 or 2 C3 low-growing legume cultivars. We are very excited for this. With very limited experience, this is showing great promise for seeding covers in a semi-arid environment. A hard frost will kill the C4s, leaving the winter wheat for the following harvest. If the C3 legumes are planted, their intent would be to survive and through their exudates feed the microbial community during that otherwise dead period from a maturing crop to the next ripening crop or to the next canopying crop. There has been no how-to manual for successfully raising cover crops in the inland Northwest. or how to quickly build soil health and capacity to the point that the soil will support crops without inputs. That is currently being done by local farmers experimenting and reporting back to venues like this. I would encourage every farmer to take a small and manageable acreage and play with cover crops, interseeded cropping, permacovers, or whatever your imagination can conjure up that may add to the soil's health and productivity. I'm open for questions if there's any.
Does anybody have any questions for Tracy? No?
Right, I have
Oh, yeah.
questions
Go
for
ahead,
you.
Amy.
Hi Tracy, so
Okay.
I was wondering about your seeding dates, because I know at one point in time you talked about you originally would seed when we normally do around our area, but then your son talked you into seeding earlier. Can you talk on that a little bit?
I'm sorry, my hearing is not very good, so.
So I originally talked to you in January at the cropping systems in Tri-Cities.
Yes.
And you talked about stepping out of the box a little bit and changing your seeding dates because Kye talked you into it. Can you speak on that a little?
Yes, basically, for years, our no-tilling experience, we were behind on our yields because of all the information that I had for 40-some years from WSU, and it was the idea that you didn't, you had to wait for a rain so you could get your cheatgrass up so you could get that killed out, and you didn't want to plant too early or you'd have bugs in the, you'd have aphid come in and do this. And I could never get those conditions where I could get it all put together and get my crop up. My crops always came up in late October. My son kind of came and he heard me complaining about this all the time, and he finally just took the drill and started seeding the first week of September. And we broke all the rules at the time. We didn't let the cheatgrass come up. We didn't wait for the rain. We were going to go, we were going to have big wheat. We were going to get all kinds of aphid. We were going to have diseases. We were going to have everything. Never happened. The yield depression went away. And so now our philosophy is we plant before we lose the moisture. This year we started planting in late August. And I'm not sure we needed to, but the way the year was, but we had the labor, and so my son, one son went on the combine, the other son went on the drill. So we got it done. But that's the criteria, in my estimation, is with no tilling, is you have to seed it when you have the moisture. Don't let it get away. You don't know when you're going to get it back.
I have a question. When you were talking about your cover crop that you seeded your wheat into and you tried to spray it down, and you said that that field had, your cover crops didn't go away, and you had a lower harvest, a lower yield on that harvest of winter wheat. You think that had anything to do with the chemicals that were sprayed rather than the competition with the cover crops?
Well, I don't think so, but the comparison was about a half a mile long border, and it was very evident all along there. The crop coming up really late, the cultivars were small. We're noticing now, we have an AquaSpy probe in our ground in that location, and it's indicating that our infiltration rate is out of this world. Right now I'm working on an experiment with NSERV and seeing if we can, through the EC portion of that probe, if we can make a determination if we're losing, and we are. I'm not sure, NSERV, this is the last year we'll use it. It seems to be a waste of money. It's moving down through the profile right now. So I'm pretty sure our roots just never was able to get to the nitrogen. And we didn't bother about taking the time to go out and top dress that early enough. Because of the inefficiency of the nitrogen applications, this last year my son decided we cut our rate in half. Makes me a little nervous because we theoretically got to put the other half in the spring, or at least a portion of it. And I'm not, we don't have any history of doing that. So, you know, we've risked our entire crop on a new experiment, and I normally don't do that. But we'll see.